First of all, you've been traveling the state quite a bit, talking to farmers, no doubt. What's been kind of the top issue or the biggest concern that you've heard out on the trail?
Well, I have been traveling across Iowa quite a bit, and there are a number of issues that people talk about. One of them that this time of the year at planting time that some people are talking about is the fact that the seed market seems to be getting pretty narrow these days, that one corporation controls 90% of the genetics of the soybeans and 80-some% of the genetics of the corn. And it's getting difficult to find alternative kind of seeds that aren't patented. And so I think that's going to be a growing concern in the future. And that concentration of the markets is really a growing phenomenon. Economists tell us that when four corporations control 40% or more of the market, that market starts to act more like a monopoly than a free market. And in our markets in agriculture, they're very concentrated. In beef, for example, four corporations control 85% of the market. In pork, it's 65% controlled by four companies. And so these are markets that aren't really functioning like free markets. In dairy, one processing company controls 40% of the market by itself. And the interesting thing is that last year when dairy farmers were having record losses, that processing company that controls 40% of the market, had two record profit quarters in a row. And so we can see the markets aren't really functioning properly. Fortunately, the federal administration is now going to do some investigating, has already started looking into this and see if we need to do some antitrust breaking up, which I think we need Teddy Roosevelt-style antitrust action here today. So that's one issue that I think is on people's minds.
A recent study was done that said that, I don't remember the exact amount, but billions of dollars could be saved if Iowans would buy state-made food, veggies, fruits, things like that. How do you see that as the future, and is there any way to cultivate that, to build that industry and keep Iowans buying food from other Iowans?
Good question, Eric. We in Iowa eat about $8 billion worth of food every year in the state. But we import about 80 to 90%, according to some estimates, of that food. So we consider ourselves to be the food capital of the world, but yet we import most of the food we eat, which is a very ironic kind of situation. And so you're right, it does represent a very big economic development opportunity. One economist at Iowa State University, Dave Swenson, has estimated that if we in Iowa would eat the recommended 5 a day fruits and vegetables, and we produce that here in Iowa for only 3 months of the year, it would add $300 million to our economy annually and 4,000 new jobs. So we can see there's a tremendous opportunity there. Plus, it would also mean fresher food and possibly safer food. And fresher food, research shows it can be more nutritious. For example, if tomatoes come from Mexico or from California, they're put in the box green, and they turn red on the way, and they're a little hard when they get here, even though they're red. But yourself, if you take a vine-ripened fresh tomato, it's a lot tastier, and it has more nutrients, more vitamins and so on, because it was able to complete its maturation on the vine.
Humboldt County just enacted a wind ordinance. It's becoming something that counties are looking into more and more. What do you see as the future of wind energy in Iowa, and is that something that you think is viable long-term for the state?
I think wind is really an important part of our future. And we in Iowa now have 20% of our electricity generated by wind. We're the highest percentage of any state. But I think we need to look at the next generation of wind. It's great that we have all this wind, but even farmers who have wind farms on their farm are still paying retail rates for the electricity. And that's, I think, is one of the concerns I have, is that we need to have ways where we can have the wind that blows over the farm power the farm. And what I'm calling for is mid-sized wind turbines all across Iowa on farms and on homeowners' land in the countryside. And that way, it would be many benefits. One is that we could power the farm with the wind that blows over the farm, and it would serve as a profit center for the farm. And also, that it would be distributed production. So instead of all the power being generated in one corner of the state and then have to build big power lines to get it to the rest of the state, if we had them all across the state, and Iowa has pretty good wind all across the state, we could that electricity would only go to the farm or in the immediate neighborhood, and so we wouldn't need a huge power line grid to allow that to happen. So we could produce a lot there. And Europe is doing some very interesting things with this to make it happen. They use what they call feed-in tariff policy. And what it amounts to is that, for example, if we targeted mid-sized wind turbines on farms, power companies that buy the electricity would be required to, for the first part of the lifetime of that wind turbine, to pay higher rates of return per kilowatt hour. And that would allow the landowner or the farmer to pay for the machine. And then once, after that initial time period, a number of years was done and it was paid for, then the rate would drop down to wholesale. Now it's 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour or something. And then the power companies would get cheap electricity, green electricity, for the lifetime of that turbine. And it would still serve for the farmer's needs, because it would power the farm and it would serve as a profit center for the farmer still. And in Europe, they find that's very successful to get these kind of targeted energy systems up and going. And that's one thing I'm calling for here is in my run for Iowa Secretary of Agriculture.
What was it that made you decided to run for the Secretary of Agriculture?
Well, what made me decide to run is I see that we in Iowa agriculture are facing some major challenges. And I think some of them we're not even recognizing. Also, we have some great opportunities that we're not taking advantage of. And to some degree, these opportunities can help us meet these challenges. And one of the challenges really is that look around at agriculture, what's very obvious even from a glance is that it's very dependent upon cheap oil. We couldn't have the agriculture we have here in Iowa without cheap oil. And the thing is, we know we're at the end of the cheap oil era. I mean, 2 years ago, it spiked up to $147 a barrel, and it caused chaos in agriculture. Fertilizer costs tripled and quadrupled in price. And you know, the U.S. military recently put out a report saying that in the next few years, we should expect oil shortages in this country. And some parts of the industry are going to go without. And that means we're going to have some big price spikes again. And economists are telling us that oil prices aren't going to just linearly rise. They're going to be up and down like it's been. And next time, one economist I just read said he expects it to hit $200 a barrel. And each time the trough of that spike is going to stay higher as well. So we have to look at ways we can become more energy independent. And of course, the wind turbines I'm speaking about are something we can do in that direction. But also there's some exciting, promising new technologies that would allow us to make, if we can develop technology, to make biofuels on the farm to power the farm. And now we're making biofuels, but we're using it to power cars going down the highway. And so we're really ignoring the future of agriculture. And if we can make biofuels that would power the farm, now imagine now when farmers grow corn to make ethanol, they still pay high retail rates for their diesel fuel for their farm. So they're receiving a low rate for their corn, commodity rate, and they're paying high rates for their fuel. Now, if we could make fuel on the farm to power the farm, not only would you eliminate that high cost of energy for your farm, but it also could serve as a more profitable kind of thing to sell whatever excess we have. Instead of selling at a cheap commodity rate, we could sell something closer to retail. So the point here is that we could put more money in the pockets of farmers. And agriculture has not been that profitable on the average. Some economists have looked at long-term averages and have found that, in truth, that the expenses of agriculture, commodity agriculture like corn, soybeans, and cattle, has been more than the income generated by it. So there's actually been a net loss in a 10-year running average. And only it's made up by subsidies from the government and also off-farm income on an average. So agriculture has not been that terribly profitable on average. And if we can find ways we can put more money in the pockets of farmers instead of the farmers being squeezed between the concentrated markets and where they sell into, like beef and hogs and corn and so on, and also squeezed by the concentrated markets they buy from, by their seeds and their fertilizers and so on. So there's really not much profit left. So if we can make agriculture more self-sufficient and the value added can be closer to the farm, and the value could stay on the farm and stay with the farmers. I think that's really the future of Iowa agriculture. And go ahead.
Francis, thank you. That's running for Iowa Secretary of Agriculture. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Eric. And if I can throw in my website, it's Thicke for Agriculture. That's Thicke is my name. And I wanted to mention real quickly is that I am a farmer. I've been a farmer for 27 years. And I have a dairy farm, milk about 80 cows on 450 acres. But I'm also a scientist by training. I have a PhD in agronomy. And I have worked in the past at the United States Department of Agriculture in Washington as a program leader for soil science. So I've seen agriculture from various angles, and I think that that could be of use for me as Iowa Secretary of Agriculture. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.